So you know how to use the 0, first, second and third conditionals in English. Fantastic. But now it's time to learn how to change these a little bit and sound even more advanced, intelligent, and just cool. So let's get started with alternatives and more advanced versions of the first conditional. Now, as you know, the first conditional consists of two parts: if plus the present simple, for example, if it rains, and for the second part of the sentence, we use the future with will. So, if it rains, I will stay at home. That is the first conditional. So here are some words and expressions that we can use to sound more advanced when we're expressing this grammatical structure. Number one is unless. Unless. So have a look here. If it's hot, we will go to the beach. If it rains, we will stay at home. So let's use the word unless. Unless it rains, we will go to the beach. We can also say we will go to the beach unless it rains. So the structure is the first conditional. The only difference is that we're using unless instead of if. And unless it rains, we will go to the beach means that if it's sunny, we will go to the beach. If it's cold, we will go to the beach. But if it rains, we won't go to the beach. So we will go to the beach unless it rains. Right, another expression we can use is even if. Look at this. We will go to the beach even if it rains. Again, the structure is the first conditional. The only difference is instead of if, we're using even if. And this means that if it's sunny, we will go to the beach. If it's cold, we will go to the beach. If it rains, we will go to the beach. So basically, we will go to the beach even if it rains. Okay, a couple of more formal ones here for you now. Great for advanced writing exams or formal situations. The first one is provided that. And this is just a super long, impressive way of saying if. Look at this example. If the weather is nice, we'll go for a picnic. Okay, boom. Let's transform this into something more impressive and more advanced. Provided that the weather is nice, we will go for a picnic. An easy alternative that makes your English sound so much more impressive. We can also use the word should. So instead of this, if he arrives, we'll let him in, we can say this: should he arrive, we'll let him in. Just be careful. Should he arrive, not should he arrives. Should he arrive, we'll let him in. The last alternative of the first conditional is using the word otherwise. And this is a really common word to use because it's really useful. I mean, we could say this: if you don't close the freezer, the ice cream will melt. If you don't close the freezer, the ice cream will melt. That's a lot of words. Instead, we could say this: close the freezer, otherwise the ice cream will melt. Close the freezer, otherwise the ice cream will melt. So, as I said in my video on the first conditional, here we've got an imperative in one part of the sentence and the future with will in the other part of the sentence. The only difference here is that we are using the word otherwise to link these parts of the sentence together. Pretty cool, eh? Right, let's have a look at some alternatives of the second conditional in English. And again, these are going to help you sound more advanced and more impressive in English. So the second conditional consists of two parts: if plus the past simple. For example, if I won the lottery. And the second part of the sentence is would plus the verb. I would buy a boat. If I won the lottery, I would buy a boat. That's the second conditional. As always, we can change the order of the sentence and nothing changes. I would buy a boat if I won the lottery is perfectly correct too. So here are a couple of expressions to use when we're using the second conditional, and these are quite formal, so they're going to look really good again if you use them in an advanced written exam or if you're using them in a very formal situation. Using the example of before, we could say, instead of if I won the lottery, were I to win the lottery. Were I to win the lottery. Wow, that's quite advanced, hey? But you don't really need to analyze it too much. Just know that instead of saying if I won, you can say were I to win. Instead of saying if I lived, we can say were I to live. Instead of saying if I ate, you can say were I to eat. So we need the infinitive at the end there, to win, to live, to eat. But the rest, you just learn it as a chunk of words and know that it is an advanced, impressive way to use the second conditional. The second part of the sentence, the would part, doesn't change. Good news. So instead of if I won the lottery, I would buy a boat, we can say were I to win the lottery, I would buy a boat. Another very similar alternative of the second conditional is by starting the if part of the sentence with if I were to, and the infinitive. If I were to win the lottery, I would buy a boat. Again, it means the same thing. We're talking about a hypothetical situation that almost definitely won't happen. In this case, me winning the lottery. So it means the same thing. If I were to win the lottery, perhaps implies that it's even more difficult to become reality. But basically, it's just quite an easy alternative that you can easily use to sound more impressive when you're speaking English. The last alternative of this second conditional is by starting the if part of the sentence with if it weren't for YouTube, I wouldn't be able to teach you English. If it weren't for my mobile phone, I wouldn't be able to chat to my friends. Okay, so we're saying thank you that this thing exists, because if it didn't exist, I wouldn't be able to do this thing. If it weren't for I wouldn't Okay, so far so good. Right, now I'm going to teach you a few alternatives that you can use for the third conditional. Now, the two parts of the third conditional are if plus the past perfect. For example, if I had known. And the second part of the sentence is would have plus the past participle. For example, I would have acted differently. If I had known, I would have acted differently. Now, instead of saying if I had known, what we can do is this. We can simply say had I known, and the meaning is exactly the same. But as I said with the others, you're going to sound really impressive and intelligent if you use this. So if you want to impress an examiner, use that. Had I known, and the rest of the sentence remains the same. If I had known, I would have acted differently. Had I known, I would have acted differently. In the last alternative of the second conditional, I taught you this. If it weren't for my phone, I wouldn't communicate easily with my friends. We've got a very similar alternative in this third conditional. We just need to change the tense. So instead of if it weren't for we have to say if it hadn't been for We're talking about a version of the past that didn't happen. So imagine yesterday I had a job interview, I got in my car and my car didn't work. Fortunately, my friend was there and my friend took me to the job interview. Thank you, friend, because if it hadn't been for my friend, I wouldn't have arrived on time. if it hadn't been for my friend. You see the difference? In the second conditional, I say if it weren't for my phone. My phone exists now, but if it didn't exist, I wouldn't be able to communicate with my friends. Here, I'm talking about an event that happened in the past. My friend was there, but if he hadn't been there, if it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have arrived on time. Again, overanalyzing the grammar doesn't really help too much sometimes. Instead, learning a chunk of words can often be the easiest way to use this kind of grammar. If it hadn't been for my friend, if it hadn't been for that, if it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't have blah blah blah. Okay, we're getting more and more advanced now, because look at this construction again. If it hadn't been for you, the next alternative I want to teach you is similar to this, but we just move the words around. In the first alternative of the third conditional, we started the sentence with had. Had I known, I would have acted differently. Well, here we can do the same thing. Instead of if it hadn't been for you, we start the sentence with had and say this: had it not been for you, had it not been for you, I wouldn't have arrived to the interview on time. Really advanced, really impressive. You can do it, and you're gonna sound great when you do. Okay, the last alternative of the third conditional is using the word but. And this is crazy, but in this structure, the word but means exactly the same as if it hadn't been for ba ba ba. Yeah, I think if you have two options, you're probably gonna want to use the word but, right? Anyway, using the example of my friend taking me to the interview, we could say, but for you, I wouldn't have arrived to the interview. But for your help, but for your car, I wouldn't have arrived on time. Greg, but for your video on the conditionals, I wouldn't have passed my English exam. Listen, you can use the simple version and that's fine, but I really encourage you to use these more advanced versions if you want to really impress and really reach for an advanced level of English. And another thing you can do if you really want to reach that advanced level of English is to not make the typical mistakes that everybody makes. So please get that book, it's mine. There's a link up there and it's free. And in that book, I just teach you all the typical mistakes that I don't want you to make, because everybody makes them. Okay, you can watch all the videos of this conditionals series there. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks for watching and bye for now.